Welcome again to everyone, and I will hand things over to our event hosts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Kearns. I'm not actually Francesca White. She's going to join us in just a second. But I work at Indiana University, and I'm happy to have everybody here join us for a conversation about critical and feminist approaches in our teaching and our research. So today we're just going to be talking a little bit about what those practices actually mean, what constitutes critical and feminist teaching and research, and how that can address, these approaches can address social and equity concerns. And we're going to be sharing lots of different examples with you so you can get a sense for not only what it means in concept, but also what it means in practice. As Kate mentioned, we have two people joining us today as presenters. We'll have time for some conversation, question, and answer with them. Before we get to that, though, we're going to ask just a little bit about you for just a couple minutes. This will help our panelists shade some of their conversation and comments towards what's most relevant to this group of people. So you'll see 4 questions in front of you. We're going to go through each one in about 30 seconds at a time. So starting with question 1, if you could tell us what your current role is, graduate student, postdoctoral scholar, faculty member, chair, dean, or staff member, and you can use the drop-down menu A, B, C, D, or E to indicate who you are, what your role is. If you're a member of a group, choose either the average or the mean or the median, or choose something that's representative of your group. And if none of those fit, you're welcome to type it in the chat. I see a lot of A and B. Let's take 10 more seconds and I'll ask Kate to post a summary for us. Kate, could you put that up for us, please? Thank you. So many graduate students here, a few postdocs, and just a few faculty members. So next we'd like to learn about what your field of study is, applied science, formal sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, or other. Again, another poll question, A through E. So this is question 2. Go for it. I see many natural sciences. Hello, biologists. I'm a biologist, too. Let's take 10 more seconds. Actually, it looks like everybody's done chiming in. Kate, could you give us a response for that? Thank you. Yes, many natural sciences here. Chemistry and physics, too, maybe. Question number 3, have you taken a course or studied topics in history and philosophy of science? This is A is yes, B is no question. It's looking like about twice as many people are saying no, but quite a number of people are saying yes. About 5 more seconds. Okay, so we have, thank you. So many of us have not, and a few of us have. And then have you taken courses in gender studies or cultural studies? A for yes and B for no. So this one looks very similar, where many of us have not. But a few of us have. Let's take 5 more seconds on this one. I see many of you aren't responding. If you could, this helps us. Some of you may be part of large groups. Thank you for responding to these, because your answers to these questions help us know basically where to start and what kind of background you might need in order to understand the conversation for today. So I'm going to pass the baton now over to Francesca, who's going to give us a little bit of background and understanding about what we mean by critical and feminist approaches in science and teaching. Francesca.
Thanks, Katie. So I really wanted to just preface this with these topics are really big topics, and people spend their entire career studying these things. So our goal is not to address everything in the hour that we have together, but I wanted to bring up a couple of key points. One, there have been lots of scientists from many fields such as physics, biology, a lot of different fields that have pointed to the ways that science and society are really blurred or even entangled. And part of that came from critiques, feminist critiques of science. And I want to clarify too what we're talking about when we say critique, because a lot of times critique is associated with a negative sort of view or something being wrong, but more so when we talk about critique, we're thinking about what's taken for granted. And so here I posted a couple of books on the slides. One by Karen Barad. She's a physicist, but also thinks through physics about social science. And really pointing to the connections between how we do science and how science is embedded and connected to society. So some of the questions, well, one of the major questions that I have bolded here is how do scientific agendas, questions, practices, etc., reflect gender normative and racist, heterosexist, classist, and ableist assumptions? And a couple of concrete examples of this. One method that's common across scientific fields is observation. And observation generally assumed to be a visual method. So that assumes a non-disabled person engaging with the field. And what does that mean about the knowledge that we produce? Another example is within physiological research. A lot of physiological research still operates within gender binaries. So it's a gender normative, it reinforces gender norms and perhaps even heterosexist assumptions. So those are really big questions that, like I said, scientists, philosophers, and sociologists wrestle with within the field of science studies. So this also has implications for science education. Given that those connections are within the field of science, what does that mean for when we're teaching science and even thinking about the history and practices within education? So similar questions, how do educational practices reflect the gender normative, racist, heterosexist, classist, and ableist assumptions? And one really important example of this is the context of education within the Americas. Historically, for example, in indigenous communities, education was a tool for colonization and assimilation for indigenous communities. And that really shaped who was the authority, what counts as science, and whose science is deemed as legitimate. So I have a couple of texts here on this slide, who's asking, that really works to unpack these big questions and thinking about who's teaching, what's being taught, and why it matters. So there's some big ideas when we are thinking about this that really shape how the rest of the presentation will go. And so now I'm going to pass it back to Katie.
Okay, I'm back, and we just wanted to find out a little bit about some of the practices that you are already familiar with, what knowledge you already bring to the table. One person I already see in the chat posted their knowledge about boarding schools for Native Americans as a way of colonizing knowledge. So on the flip side, what's a positive, what's an empowering and space-making practice for bringing in people who might not otherwise have been considered, or things that might be taken for granted? I'll be quiet while you type a few ideas up on the whiteboard. Or yes, thank you, also in the chat if you would like, if that's easier. Participatory research. Culturally relevant pedagogy, great. Examples that are relevant to the people that you're engaging with. co-learners and co-teachers. So seeing ourselves as teachers, as people who can learn also in this context, and as students as teachers in the classroom. Non-traditional projects other than cars and steam engines. So examples that we don't traditionally think about. Gender-neutral pronouns. Thinking about how I see seminar-style classes, so even thinking about the layout of the room. Active learning, so people getting to talk a lot, everybody getting to talk. Making sure students see representations of multiple types of successful people. Great, let's spend 5 more seconds. Thank you for the happy face. People learning the tools, highlighting contributions. Great, so I see a lot of examples about how we broaden our perception of what examples can be brought, and also thinking positively instead of as a deficit about who belongs and who it's for. I'm going to move forward so that we can make best use of the time of our panelists here. We have 2 panelists here with us today, Kyle Trenshaw, who's an Educational Development Specialist at the University of Rochester Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and Denise Pope, who works with CIRTL as the Teaching as Research Program Coordinator. What we're going to do is just ask them for about 1 to 2 minutes each to just first introduce just a tiny bit about themselves, and then Kyle, we'll have Kyle start off with talking a little bit about his work. So I'm going to pass it. Kyle, if you would start with just a brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So I am the Educational Development Specialist for Natural Sciences and Engineering here at the University of Rochester's Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, which is a really long title. I came here recently in May after postdoctoral work at Brown University in STEM education, and my PhD in chemical engineering is from the University of Illinois, where I looked at self-determination theory and how motivation can be supported for students in sophomore and junior, kind of like the dropout zones for engineering students. So, yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Denise Pope, and as Katie said, I'm currently working with CIRTL, but I've been around long enough. I've actually had kind of 3 phases to my career. I'm trained as a biologist, specifically animal behavior. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And I realized in graduate school I was really interested in teaching, and so after doing a couple of research postdocs, I was looking for positions teaching at primarily undergraduate institutions, which is also the sort of place I did my undergrad. And I taught at 2 different of the small undergraduate institutions for 9 years, and then after that I was kind of looking to explore something outside of academia, and it turns out I didn't get very far outside of academia, but what I did for 3.5 years was I worked as an biology education researcher at this small company that makes educational software for college biology classes, and I was working to both test the effectiveness of the software, but also really studying how students thought about different topics in biology so that we could best build our software to teach them. And I just learned all of that stuff on the job. I didn't have any training in that. And speaking of which, I'm now, I realized I got really interested in professional development, specifically supporting people on their development of teaching, their teaching skills. And so I was excited to be able to join CIRTL in January. And so I actually don't do very much professional development of graduate students and postdocs directly, but I actually support the leaders of the local CIRTL institutions who are doing that professional development. So thanks.
Thanks, Denise. We'll talk to you in just a little bit. So we're going to start with Kyle. So we have just about 10 minutes, just shy of 10 minutes, Kyle, for you to share some of your work and ideas. So at about maybe 2:25, we'll turn it over to questions that people have for you. Sound good?
That sounds good. Alrighty, so I looked at some of the things that were sent to me kind of in preparation for this panel, and I wanted to highlight some of the topics that people were interested in. One of them was what got you started as kind of like a critical STEMist, and so that's what I'll talk about on this next slide. So just kind of highlighting some things that, that happened in my life that got me into a space where I was thinking about feminism and thinking about STEM and thinking about whether or not everyone has an equal opportunity to, or really I should say equitable opportunity to participate. So as a child and in high school, up through high school, I lived in rural Missouri in a very homogeneous and very conservative town. And so other students did come out as LGBTQ in a variety of ways and were bullied mercilessly for it. So I, in high school, decided, actually in like maybe middle school, decided I would never tell anyone that anything was, you know, up for me in that area. But then I got to undergrad and I realized that people actually could talk about those kind of things when they aren't in their, you know, really, really dangerous hometowns for those kinds of ideas. And so I came out as bisexual in undergrad. But then in the dormitories, I was confronted with my own racism. So as a child, I had been taught through a variety of, I mean, not explicitly necessarily, but been taught that Black people were dangerous and loud. And so when some of the people in my dormitory were Black and loud, I assumed that they were also dangerous and did not speak to any of them. And then had to work in teams with them in engineering courses and things, and realized that, oh, actually they're just people. So that was really kind of a defining moment where I was like, all right, maybe I'm wrong about things. And so then actually in my sophomore year, I experienced some transphobia, specifically in STEM, where there was an electrical engineering student who transitioned from male to female during that year. And the things that were said about her were really horrible and just absolutely just scarring, I would say. So some of the people in my dormitory said things like, oh, you know, he's disgusting, he should just die, he's a mark on the department, like, why does he have to be here, I don't want to have to look at him, stuff like that. And so that was another moment kind of reaffirming, like, oh, trans people are not okay. I will never tell anyone that I think that that's what I am too. So I continued to be in the class about that. So then in grad school, I had a master's thesis advisor who's different from my PhD advisor, actually, but he is a gay man, and he definitely censored himself instead. So I didn't actually learn that he had a partner until several years into grad school, and he didn't, you know, bring his partner to anything. He never talked about his home life. It was very much business, and I could see in the time that I knew him, he went bald. So he started with hair, and in the couple of years that I knew him, he was almost completely bald. So I definitely saw that stress of being queer in a STEM space. And then again in grad school, I was confronted with my own racism again when I was the president of a grad student kind of group. And so from there, we were doing a Halloween thing, and we dressed up as cowboys and Indians. And then we posed for pictures where all the cowboys were pointing their guns at the Indians. So it was really messed up, and so that's where I want to come to the next part. I just hit the keyboard. I realized I have to click up here. Sorry. So long story short, I quit STEM and became a STEM educator through a process of kind of self-actualization and realizing that these things exist. And it was really, really facilitated by patient people who cared a lot about me and were willing to put up with my bull crap to get me to the place I am at now. So, for example, after that Halloween incident, my master's thesis office mates patiently listened to what I was thinking about and asked me really non-judgmental questions about, so why did you guys pick cowboys and Indians? Actually, one of my peers who was from India was like, oh, you mean like Indian, like me? And I was just like, oh, no, that would have been too far. And then when I said those words, I was like, oh, why is that too far? What's the difference? Oh, there is no difference. And so that kind of thing, those moments where people just really take care of you, really listen to you, I would say that's the biggest thing that brought me to where I am. So, for example, my PhD advisor, you know, he's straight Asian American man, leads a children's church choir, was absolutely the most enthusiastic proponent of me studying LGBTQ folks in engineering. And my husband, didn't divorce me when he found out I was trans, even though I hadn't told him before we got married. So all of these moments in my life built up to this kind of work, this kind of thought process behind science and stuff. So just a couple kind of thoughts on how you support LGBTQ folks. I would say number one is unapologetically discuss gender dynamics, sexual orientation, heterosexism, transphobia, misogyny. Call it out when you see it. Talk about racism. Talk about all the isms, and do so without feeling as though you shouldn't be, because I would say that's the biggest thing. Is the more people talk about it, the more people feel like they can talk about it, and the more likely we are to address it. I think also going along with that, own up to your mistakes and apologize when you mess up. Display LGBTQ supportive signage on your office door. Use gender neutral language. I think that was said on one of the other slides. Use they instead of he and she, even when you're talking in the singular. It's okay. Nobody's going to, grammar police aren't going to arrest you. It's all right. Use significant other instead and spouse instead of like wife or husband, or assuming boyfriend, girlfriend. And parents instead of mom and dad. I get that a lot. A lot of times when people see me with my kids, early in my transition, people are like, "Oh, you're such a great mom." Like, actually, I'm a dad. I'm very proud of that I am a seahorse dad. So, and put your pronouns in the signature, your emails. It's a really easy thing to have, and then everyone can see. It reminds people like, "Oh, that's something I should think about." And then what does inclusive mentorship look like? I see that I only have 3 minutes left because I talked a lot. I'm sorry. So I'll just go through this pretty quickly. So what I think of when it comes to inclusive mentorship, or, and this can be faculty to faculty or faculty to student, or even, peer-to-peer kind of a thing for students, is take nothing for granted. Don't make any assumptions about a person related to anything that is about them that you think you know. Meet mentees as whole people. Know that they're bringing an entire person to the table every single time. They can't cut away some portion of themselves to come to your class or to come to a meeting. Don't try to clone yourself or make some student more like you even though they're not, and force them into some mold. Listen with curiosity but not with judgment. So ask questions. Don't make sweeping generalizations and judge people. Inhabit humility. When people call you out, don't get defensive. Question defensiveness. Like if people are getting defensive, ask why. Ask questions. And always address bias. Doing the wrong thing is better than doing nothing. So shows that you are noticing things and care. Practical examples. People ask for that in the stuff. So learning to use people's names and pronouns, and be critical of articles and textbooks and media you assign in classes. Why am I only assigning male authors, things like that. Take a moment of silence when something messed up happens in this country. Just be like, a bunch of people got shot at a country music festival. I would just like to acknowledge that happened. I saw it, and I'd like to take a moment of silence for this, traumatic event in this world. You don't have to say any more. If you're scared that you're going to mess up a conversation, just take a moment of silence, but at least students know you care, that you're thinking about it, and that you're a human existing in the actual society that they are as well, and not just this robot in the classroom. Share accomplishments of diverse people in your field. I think that was mentioned on the other side. Remind mentees of their values. So it's shown that women and students of color, if you remind them of their values, of the reasons why they're doing things or why they're studying STEM, that they're more likely to continue. So build that into assignments. Build in ways, have students write a letter to themselves and then read it back to themselves partway through the semester, things like that. And talk about inclusivity and equity explicitly as much as possible as it relates to your discipline. And I promise you 100% it does. You can find ways, just don't tell me like, oh, but my discipline, it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. Not impossible. And then I just want to talk a little bit about work-life balance for people. So I think this is just, I made this up. This is not research. This is just what I do personally. So whenever I experience some moment of bias, I kind of have this immediate reaction. And then it goes through, I have to take some time and individually process. And then I go through this time of kind of protective gossip where I talk to other people about it. And that, I think that process enhances my resilience for the next bias experience, which I will undoubtedly have. And then that can make my immediate response better the next time. So that's kind of the idea that I wanted to talk about here. But I really wanted to highlight this idea of protective gossip, because I think that a lot of times we associate gossip with like a negative connotation, and that's not what I mean here. That's not like, you know, talking about someone behind their back with no reason. What I'm talking about is, hey, so I was in a meeting and so seems really averse to like talking about race, and that made me uncomfortable. And did it make you uncomfortable? Maybe we should talk about that so that we can be prepared for the next time it happens. And I think my favorite way to find these, you know, kind of protective gossip people, like partners in this process, is to, when something weird happens in a meeting and you're just like, whoa, look for other people and make eye contact. So like look around the room, who's looking around looking weird, make eye contact with them, maybe raise your eyebrows a little bit, and then after the meeting be like, so did you hear what I heard? And then there you go, done. You've got a new person who you can talk to. So think about the people who do you call after somebody tells you you're not going to get, you know, like women are less common to get tenure in the department and that you should really make sure you work hard. Or who do you text after, you know, that everybody's favorite old curmudgeon says Orientals again during a seminar? Or who do you flop down in their office after, you know, your boss tells, you know, like, or maybe even like a department staff member who's organizing events says, oh, so what do they eat about students who are attending a first generation event? So like who do you run to? Those are the people who can really help. And building that network of people that you know are all thinking about this together can be so like protective and so make you realize you're not alone, and also kind of build up a critical mass to the point where someone will say something eventually, and feel safe in doing that because they know there are other people around who feel the same way. So, okay, sorry, I went 2 minutes over. I'm sorry. So anyway, that's my spiel.
Well, we have a couple minutes to ask you some questions, or actually ask all of us some questions, because as you've been talking, there's been quite a bubble of conversation happening in the chat that I'm sure you didn't have time to also process at the time. So this is a chance for the people who are participating to ask some questions. You can either write it on the whiteboard or we'll pay attention to the chat window. We had a conversation, actually it was related to what you were talking about, Kyle, about the difference between calling in and calling out, which seems very similar to the some of the comments that you were making about how your in-group can help you correct some of your misconceptions or what you're leaving out, rather than having that effort placed on the group that you're marginalizing by your comments. So we have a question here. What's the best way to encourage people to take care with gender-neutral pronouns without sounding judgmental?
I mean, I personally have stopped caring about sounding judgmental because I'm just so over it. I'm so over having to like perfectly say every single little thing because I'm trans. Like, cis people don't have to figure out exactly how to say stuff. So it frustrates me. It definitely frustrates me. I would say that what I generally do is just say, you know, saying he or she is actually longer than just saying they. So you can save yourself a couple characters. And it's you know, it's becoming more accepted in terms of grammatical, so it doesn't, nobody minds. Just say they. But I mean, if you say that kind of thing, you're definitely taking a step out as like someone who is going to address that kind of stuff. So I know for some people that can be pretty risky. So if you have, you know, if you're just a grad student or you're just a postdoc and you're a little bit concerned about the way that your superiors might perceive you, I think the most important thing is protect yourself first. So you have your own career to worry about, and you know, if you don't have the I guess political clout or bandwidth to call people out, then don't. Protect yourself first, so that then you can protect others. So that's what I would say.
So someone is asking to talk a bit more about protective gossip, and I'm wondering what the question is, or if that person would be willing to raise their hands or talk so we can hear a little bit more about what their question is. I don't have a microphone, so if you could.
So I'll just talk a little bit more about it. So, for example,
maybe in 2 minutes.
Yeah. So, for example, just like say someone says, just drops a little kind of microaggression, like, well, I just think the reason why female faculty aren't getting tenure is because they just can't cut it. So that happens in some meeting, and it's upsetting. But maybe the person who says it is the department chair, or they're a tenured faculty with a lot of political clout in the department, and you don't feel comfortable during the meeting addressing it. So what I would do after that is I would go and seek out one of these people who are my, co-conspirator, gossiper people, and just say, man, that sucked. I did not enjoy that. And then to have the other person be like, yeah, that totally sucked. I totally saw that. I was there in the room with you. We both are validating each other's experience. This sucks. Having that moment is what I would say is the protective part that enhances your resilience, because then you can call upon that, like, well, at least so-and-so agrees with me that that person is a jerk. Eventually, like I said, if you can build up enough of a network of kind of potential gossipers, then you can, or I guess co-conspirators is another way you could say it. Like I said, I just made it up. It's not from a research paper. So once you have enough people like that, eventually one of them might have enough political clout to be like, hey, yo, Mr. Smarty Pants so-and-so tenure guy, that sucks. Don't say that. And so, yeah, that's what I think of it as. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Thanks, Kyle. I think that protective gossip is a way to, as you said, validate and help us feel like we're not alone in our experiences, and gather that, get over the inertia and gather some momentum around how do we move forward in action. So that Denise has some time to share her thoughts, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some more bigger questions. Thank you so much to everybody who's taking awesome notes on the right-hand side. It's really helpful. We'll have a screen grab of this. Denise, you're up next.
Great, thanks. I got to see Kyle's slides first, so I took a page from him, and thinking about how did I come to this. Specifically, I want to talk about a couple of experiences I had in some feminist STEM teaching, specifically in biology. As I said in my introduction, I'm a biologist. I've also always been a feminist, but it took quite a while for me to bring those two together, and I didn't really see how they could come together. It was a gradual process, and when looking back at it, the two things I think really influenced that process was some of the extracurricular activities I did in grad school, which I'll explain, and then also other researchers in my field who were actually engaging in feminist criticism really influenced me. And each of those I kind of turned into a class, which I'll explain briefly. So the extracurricular activities were, I was involved in this graduate student group, Women in Science and Engineering, and that was great because it got me out of my lab in my building and interacting with other women in other STEM departments and understanding commonalities of what they were experiencing. And we hosted a bunch of, yeah, I was glad to see that several of you are actually here at different institutions. So we hosted a bunch of events like reading groups and dinners with faculty and career events. And it was held at Duke Women's Center, which also was just like useful. It got me out of, it was on the quad, and I got to see another part of campus and interact also with more undergraduates and people in other positions. And then actually also had this affiliation with what was then called Duke Women's Studies, which now has a more inclusive name, Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies. And that was great because it actually brought me. I attended some of their events. They brought in some really big name feminist historians of science and philosophers of science that I learned from. And they actually also invited me to participate in their yearly grad student Women's Studies Symposium. And I was very intimidated by that. I was very much out of my element. And but I learned a lot from the process. So, you know, people were using words like epistemology and phenomenology, which they don't do in biology for the most part, and they were reading papers at the front of the room rather than having showing slides. But so it was uncomfortable, but I'm really glad I did it. It really broadened my horizons. And actually, also, I was able to, once I got my first teaching position, which was at Trinity University, which is in San Antonio, I was in the Department of Biology, but my prior experience led me to, I valued that so much, I reached out to the folks in the Women's and Gender Studies program. It was an interdepartmental program, saying that I was interested in being involved in the program, and they formed a faculty study group, and they included me, and I was very kind of intimidated and thinking, like, I am not trained in this, I don't really know anything about this, but as it turned out, as I talked to them in that study group, they were kind of intimidated by me as like the scientist, and so it was actually really, they made it clear, they welcomed me, they made it clear I had things to add, and I really appreciated that. And they actually had already had a class on the books called, it was just, sorry, I guess I should look at my slide, Science, Gender, and Sexuality Colloquium, and that was supposed to be a grab bag so that anyone could offer a kind of course within that framework. And so I decided to offer the first offering of that, and what I taught was a very kind of broad women and science class, sort of definitely too broad, women and science, not women in science. And I tried to incorporate a lot of different things that I had kind of learned along the way, so some feminist critiques of science and then responses of scientists to those feminist critiques, both positive and negative responses, and then sort of some analyses of the barriers to women's full participation. Definitely a little bit too much to cover in one class, but it was a really good learning experience, and I think it was still a good class, even though it was maybe a little bit too broad. Just to give you an example, this is one of the books we read. It's a fantastic book called Has Feminism Changed Science? And just to let you know, the spoiler alert is that the answer is yes, it has changed science. So this is by Londa Schiebinger, who is a historian of science, and she has other books. It might be a little outdated now. I think the latest edition was in 2001, but it still might be worth the read. And I just want to give some examples of the student final papers. I had students from different disciplines, you know, humanities and social sciences, as well as the STEM fields, and they really kind of applied what we were learning to their own fields, like psychology. And actually, this one student who was planning to go to vet school actually looked at the feminization of veterinary medicine and how once women started coming in greater numbers to the field, that the salary went down, depressingly. So just to wrap this up, let's talk about this class. I learned a lot from this. It was a great experience, and I also thought if I teach this again, I might want to actually, you know, narrow it down a bit. And but I think the process also left me open to recognizing what was going on in my own field. I feel a little silly. It took me a while to figure it out, but about the feminist criticism that was already going on in my own field. And I have to drop a little Darwin on you. And this is just, so specifically within animal behavior, what I studied is Darwin's theory of sexual selection, which kind of is designed to explain how sexual dimorphisms evolve. And sexual dimorphisms are in different species of animals where the male and females look very different. That's the dimorphism part, or also behave very differently. So this example here is a bird of paradise. That's the male on the left and the female on the right. And this is a powerful theory. It explains a lot, but from the very beginning, it was really tainted by some pretty clear societal biases. And for instance, I mean, people just saw animals through the stereotypical gender roles of humans. So males were characterized as being like competitive and aggressive, and females were coy and choosy. And they were also like, you know, this sort of trope about selfless motherhood. And then also there was this idea that same-sex sexual behavior was unnatural. And in fact, what we now know is it goes on all across the animal kingdom. And in fact, researchers were blind to it because they just didn't see it as a possibility. And critics have now been pointing these things out. Also, they didn't even pay attention to females and their behavior because they were, you know, thinking, oh, they're just coy and passive and don't really do anything. So the feminists critics were really pointing out all of these biases and how they were limiting really what we were looking at in the field. So I actually decided in my next teaching position at Mount Holyoke College, which one important bit of information maybe is that that's an all-women's college. And I was in the Department of Biology, but I had to kind of round out my teaching load with a small seminar for, upper division seminar for, something in my field. And actually what I was recognized, hey, this is a great opportunity to teach exactly this stuff that I've been thinking about. So I offered this class with like a very unwieldy name, Sexual Selection and Sexual Conflict in Animals, Theory, Research, and Feminist Critique. And so the idea was to read classic papers, so starting with Darwin, and also very current papers in animal behavior and evolution, but also be reading feminist critiques of the field, both from within the field and outside of the field. And so with the goal that the students would gain a solid understanding of the biological topics, but also a real appreciation for how the social and cultural context affects production and perception of science. This class was also, I got to teach it twice, which was fantastic, and I think it was a great experience, both for me and I think also for the students. So one thing we read during the class is another book I'd highly recommend called Sexual Selections by Marlene Zook, and she really highlights, it's written in a very accessible and funny style, and she really highlights the subtitle is What We Can and Can't Learn About Sex from Animals. How we use these very human lenses to look at animals, and therefore we don't see what they're really doing. And on the flip side, we also kind of judge them by our own morality and consider them to be amoral if they do things that we don't think are appropriate. And then some student papers. Again, they brought a lot of their own experiences into their papers, and they wrote some fantastic papers. And I really had to push them to make them into critique papers and not just sort of literature reviews, but we went through some drafts, and they were able to do that, and I think that was a great experience. So then finally I just wanted to reflect briefly on like why this is important and maybe worth doing from my own perspective and experience. So I think the benefits to students there's a lot of benefits, I would argue. So, and for one thing, like, students in the STEM disciplines often have as undergraduates, have the idea that, these are all about memorization. I just have to remember the Krebs cycle or whatever, the parts of cells, and not understanding, not realizing that they can actually take a critical approach to science and actually have opinions about science, and also recognizing that science is a living and developing field, and that society shapes science and science shapes society. So I think this is a good venue really to let them kind of recognize that for themselves across the semester. And then I think it was also it's really beneficial for them to start thinking across disciplinary boundaries, because as soon as you're out of college, you're not, usually siloed in your own little discipline, and so it's really useful to be talking and thinking across fields. As far as benefits for colleagues, so this might be a bit more of a stretch and a little trickier. I think that them seeing me offering, someone from a biology class offering an interdisciplinary gender studies class like this was beneficial, so it wasn't just like people from other disciplines talking about science, but going the other way as well. And maybe, hopefully they learned a little bit about critical approaches to science. I would say it also has potential for backlash, most definitely, that people, some, curmudgeons don't think highly of this kind of approach. But then benefits for me, and you, if you decide to do something like this, I would say this is like absolutely some of the most meaningful teaching I've ever done, and I learned a lot about my own field through doing this. I learned a ton from the students. It was definitely a co-teaching, co-learning situation. It also changed my approach to teaching introductory biology. It really emboldened me to go and look at how I was teaching this like sort of very established, accepted stuff in introductory biology, and realize like, whoa, I need to include a lot more of this critical approaches even at the introductory level. And also, really started me thinking about my own approach to my animal behavior research before I stopped doing it. But just in sum, I wanted to encourage you to learn from other disciplines, interact with other graduate students outside of other disciplines. You don't have to take courses in gender studies to learn a lot about or feminist theory. To learn a lot, you can just go to some seminars, talk to other people. Because I really think it can be really rewarding in terms of your career. You might be able to turn it into some further teaching and research opportunities, and it also is really rewarding personally, I would say. So I talked really fast, I think, but I tried to get through everything. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We've actually had a lot of activity on the chat window while you were speaking. So I want to bring up I'm going to ask one of the questions, but invite the audience to write additional questions on the board. So the question is, what is effective wording for letting students know they should be aware that courses will take a feminist and critical approach to science, in addition to science content?
Well, in these upper division science classes, I was very explicit in the course description, and I'm happy to share these. Kate was saying that we could post them. You know, I can share my syllabi or course descriptions afterwards, because I didn't want people to be confused about what it was about, and I also tried to make this title as explicit as possible. And in introductory biology, I don't think you need to do that. I think you should just do it, and they won't even know that you're doing that, and they will just like, oh, that's interesting. That's what I would say. I mean, I think there's some cases where you should just slip it in without saying it, and in other cases, if it's a class that's designed to be interdisciplinary, you know, just be really explicit about it.
Okay, so. Okay, one more. I was trying to make sure that there aren't more questions coming up in the chat box, but there's a question here. How did you deal with resistance to questioning and critiquing evolutionary theory, specifically with colleagues who are not self-identified as feminists?
That's a really good question. I think one benefit of the teaching venue is, at least at the two institutions where I did most of my teaching, what you did in the classroom was really kind of left to you, and there was sort of this belief in intellectual freedom that you could do what you wanted to in the classroom. That's not to say there weren't people. I'm sure there were people knowing what, you know, just knowing their opinions about other things who were not happy about me teaching it, but I never got direct resistance, but I'm sure it was there. And in the case when I was teaching at Trinity University, I was not in a supportive department, and I didn't teach the class until like my last year there. And at that point, I was like, I don't care that there's resistance. I'm going to offer this class. I want to, and I had support from outside of my department, and so that's kind of how I dealt with it. And I mean, I think that also in small departments, faculty hear from students how the class is going. So I hope that they actually heard from students like, hey, actually I'm learning a ton in this class, and these are the sorts of things I'm learning. So that actually they might have gotten that message kind of indirectly.
Thank you. So it looks like there's another question, and I'm not sure if the person is done typing. What approaches can you recommend for women of color? With the person who's typing about women of color, hopefully you have a mic. Would you raise your hand and ask the question?
It looks like they're finishing it. So to deal with teaching about race and gender. Great question. I have a colleague at Mount Holyoke who, after I left, she taught a class on the biology of race, or basically the lack of biological basis of race. And she worked through just a couple of books that were really detailed. And I think, so it really does depend on the context and what kind of freedom you have to teach things like that. She did that after she had gotten tenure. I was actually not tenure track, so I had more freedom there as well, really. I think that if you find the criticism and learn about it, you can bring it in different ways, both through a specific class, but also in introductory ways. I think if you're I don't know. I guess I felt confident enough in bringing these things up in introductory biology, and it's not like I did it on the first day. That that I think the students took it in a way that it made them think more rather than being kind of challenged by what I was saying. On the other hand, I have to say that I was doing that when I was at Mount Holyoke, and that is an all-women's school, and so maybe the audience was more receptive. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
I was wondering if I could bring in a question that would bring in Kyle into this too. So that, Denise, thank you so much for all those examples of feminist and critical approaches in biology. And I wonder if, Kyle, coming from chemistry, if there were examples of, you know, given the knowledge that you have now, the ways in which you see chemistry as a content and methodology area as examples of criminalist, that's terrible, critical and feminist approaches in chemistry.
So I'm actually a chemical engineer. So I would say I probably know more about engineering than chemistry in particular. But I think with, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I could speak to chemistry. I've only taken, I took organic. I think we take PChem. But I would say in engineering in particular, there are a lot of things that you can bring in, thoughts about the way that like infrastructure is built and how it's upkept in different neighborhoods, and the ways that people think about development in terms of like parks and things and all that kind of stuff with planning. I know that a lot of times people do kind of, you know, oh, let's make a cane for a person with a disability in a design project. I feel like a lot of times that kind of stuff just objectifies people with disabilities rather than actually doing any good. And it makes also further, it makes engineering students think that they're being really inclusive when actually they're just further objectifying the problem, just exacerbating things. So I think that it has to really be ingrained in every aspect of what you're doing. So when you're assigning homework problems, when you're including kind of like environmental concerns and project reports as something that they have to write, that really there should also kind of be like a, you know, community impact. So you're gonna design a park somewhere, or you're gonna build a chemical plant next to this small town. What happens to the community? And that has to be a part of the conversation, not just like, oh, I learned how to make a new chair for old people in a nursing home. Like, who cares? Not important. The important piece is that you care about human beings rather than the chair, you know? So, yeah, I would say that it has to be incorporated everywhere. It can't just be like a one-off checkbox that, oh, I did my inclusivity bit for today. So, yeah.
Thanks for correcting me about the chemistry and engineering part. Sorry about that. Is there a text that you often turn to? We've been seeing lots of references come across that hopefully people will follow up on later. And Kyle, is there one that is a go-to for you when you think about critical and feminist approaches? I can see you looking at your bookshelf.
So I would have to say kind of not. But also, sort of, so I don't have a book about feminist theory that I would go to, but there's this book that I have, if I can see it from here, it's called Switch, just the word switch, and it talks about kind of like making arguments that help people to change their mindset, and I feel like that is a little bit more where I would invite faculty to read at, rather than giving them a thick tome with almost impenetrable queer theory concepts in it. I think I would pick one of those. I know there are some others that are kind of like just related to education reform, or like trying to make change in higher education, that are kind of like how not to get your, you know, STEM innovation shot down. And I think they're just like articles or you know, like chapters and other things. I don't know that I have a title right now, but I think that's where, if I was going to think about things to offer to someone, if they were starting to kind of dip their toe in the water of thinking about like critical feminist theory and things like that. I would pick some of those that are more about helping to argue your points. Yeah.
And people are posting a few others in the chat window too, so I'll try to pull them up to the slide. And Francesca has a couple additional things to share with us too.
Sure. So a lot of times people wonder where could they do this work, and so I wanted to highlight a couple of examples. One is a postdoc opportunity doing feminist biology. That seems very aligned with what Denise was mentioning. And this is upcoming due in February, if anyone is on the job market. And this is not just for recent graduates, also people, it says position is open to mid-career or senior scholars as well. So that's one opportunity. And then another really great research center brings scientists and sociologists and folks from humanities together to think through science and different problems in science. So the goal here is really to put these different disciplines in conversation, but not to convert scientists to sociologists, for example. One of the directors for the center is Karen Barad. She's a physicist, but writes a lot about the intersections of science and society. So at this time, we have about 3 minutes. Do we have enough time to take one more question and go on to evaluation? If there's one person that wants to raise their hand and ask a question.
That's my cue. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. We do still have a few minutes left in the day's event, so please feel free to keep up the conversation that's been going in the chat window. It's been super lovely and exciting to see the back and forth that you guys are having with each other and with the speakers. This is our final event in this series. I feel like we ended on a pretty great and exciting and encouraging and strong note. I hope you all feel the same. Regardless of how you feel about the event, I want to encourage you to share your feedback with us in this brief event survey. The link is on the slide. I'll also post the survey link in the chat window. And I want to warn folks that in the coming days, I will be sending out a series survey in addition to this post-event survey. It asks for some more in-depth feedback, and although this is the last event in this series, we are right now beginning planning for our spring semester when we will have many more event series, some likely on similar topics. And so whatever feedback you give us now, I just want to let you know it will be actionable. It will help us actually inform what we do in a concrete way. So there's the link on the slide for today's post-event survey. And then I'll be in touch with those of you who have attended events in this series with a post-series survey. And Kyle, I see your question in the chat window. If you want to talk about how great this event was, feel free to fill out the survey. But no, you don't need to fill out the survey. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been wonderful having these weekly discussions about these topics. I've enjoyed it a lot personally. Thanks so much to Katie and Francesca. They thank our speakers at the end of every event, and our speakers do indeed deserve their thanks, but they also, Katie and Francesca also deserve our thanks. They have been doing a mountain of work to bring these events to us every single week, and they have built such a wonderful series out of very difficult and challenging topics, and I'm so happy that we got to a point in this event where we could end with a dialogue like we had today. Thanks, everyone.